Hi, Homeworthy. I'm Stephanie, and this is my home in Westchester. Come on in.
Today we're welcomed into the home of Stephanie Perez O'Boyle, an interior designer who transformed a dated 1980s white box into a warm, character-filled family haven. Stephanie and her husband discovered this condo during a chaotic time, 9 months pregnant and displaced from a flooded rental, but looked past the blank walls and outdated finishes and saw its potential.
I had just given birth and we moved in with a 3-week-old newborn, and I had him slung to my chest. I had a pump in one hand, I had an iPad in the other hand. I'm literally sketching out the cabinetry for the kitchens as we're walking through the space. I'm doing everything in real time.
With nearly 12-foot ceilings, massive windows, and help from her father-in-law carpenter, Stephanie spent 4 years transforming every corner into a multi-purpose space that balances beauty with the reality of life with 2 young kids.
Every single nook and cranny and corner of this home has been a memory or a moment in time that has been so special for us.
Stephanie shares her love of vintage lighting, handmade tiles, and collecting treasures from her travels. To watch Stephanie's home tour ad-free, scan the QR code on screen or visit homeworthyplus.com to watch all of our recent episodes ad-free and to receive exclusive membership perks. You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Perez O'Boyle. I'm an interior designer, and you're here in my home in Westchester, New York. So I was actually born in Westchester. My family's still here, only 15 minutes away from me. And my husband and I, after graduating college, moved to New York City, where we lived there for about 10 years. And we were part of the deserters who left during COVID. And we kind of picked a place randomly on a map and decided to go to Newport, Rhode Island on a whim. And we stayed there for about 2.5 years, and we bought a house there. It was a very quick blip in our lives, but it was a super special time. And we had gotten married, I had gotten pregnant with our first child, and my husband got called back to work. So we ultimately decided to come back to Westchester. And we found a rental home that's actually a block away from our home now. And we had planned on staying there temporarily while we kind of watched the market and see if we could find a potential forever home. I was about 7.5 months pregnant when we had moved from Newport to that rental home. So about a month after that, the home flooded and we had to leave and move in with my parents, which is not ideal when you're then at that point 9 months pregnant. And I had our first baby at my parents' house, and we were walking along the street here. We're actually only a block away from the beach, and we saw a sign for an open house for our condo. We hadn't known anything about it or hadn't seen anything online, but we knew the area very well, so we just decided to walk in. And when we walked in, it was horrible. It was completely dated. It had not been touched since it was built in the 80s. It was a blank white box. It had no character. It had been rented out a few times, so definitely had some tough love over the years. And it was a project for sure. Like bottom to top, we knew that it was gonna be a full gut reno, but I'm an interior designer, my father-in-law's a carpenter, my husband actually went to school for engineering, even though that's not what he ultimately went to do. So I felt like we had the right crew to take on such a project. And even right there that day, we put an offer in and we ended up getting the home. And it's been 4 years now. Welcome to my living room. This is actually the room that convinced us to buy the condo originally. Even though it was a white box with absolutely no personality, a super dated fireplace that desperately needed updating, there's so much natural light. There's nearly floor to ceiling casement windows. The ceiling itself is almost 12 feet high. It's certainly very impactful when you first walk in here, and I only could see the potential of what we could turn it into. So this is actually the room that we focused on last out of the entire renovation. And we just renovated it about 8 months ago. So I had lived in this house for nearly 3.5 years prior to starting the project, and I knew exactly what we needed. It's a very multi-purpose room. It's our family room, our lounge area, where we host guests. It's my kids' playroom, so it has been very much utilized by our family. And the first thing that I knew it needed desperately was some storage. So I designed these built-ins. My father-in-law built them. I just wanted a place to be able to stick all of the primary colored toys that were just lined up in this room beforehand in a bunch of baskets, and they were driving me insane. So I actually had my father-in-law build these pretty hefty pullouts for my son so that he could actually bring it out and see the toys that he was taking out, as opposed to flinging his whole body in there. And just to elevate the design slightly, we did a creamy two-tone paint on the cabinets. So creamy in the middle and a little bit whiter white on top. And I just think it adds a really nice touch and some dimension. We have some vintage lighting here. That's something that you're gonna see a lot in my home. If there's any place that I recommend to clients and anyone really who I work with, it's go vintage when it comes to light fixtures. You're gonna find the most unique, beautiful, patinaed, light fixtures from many, many years ago that have seen probably a lot of families and homes. So I'll try to point them out when we're going through the home. And then we also updated the fireplace. This is a tile that, again, I knew I wanted to use right away when I was designing, because we've lived here for so long. It's from Tiles of Ezra. I love the handmade nature of it. I think it's so beautiful and how it, resembles Delft tile. And then I designed the surround and the mantle, and my father-in-law built it. It was a super special Christmas this year because we finally had a finished living room and a mantle, and I was able to hang all of our stockings, and we decorated the living room really beautifully, and we had like a 9.5-foot tree. And it was the first year that my son was like actually conscious to what Christmas was and what Santa is, and he woke up and ran downstairs, and it was honestly like my most favorite Christmas of my whole life. So this is my very chic 1980s pass-through window that when we first came in here, like the designer and like aesthetic side of me was like, oh, we're gonna close that up immediately because the wall is asymmetric, and why do we have this hole in the wall that's not even in the center of the wall? It drove me a little crazy. We use this constantly, from passing snacks back and forth and just running over here when I'm in the kitchen cooking and making sure that my son is playing nicely with my daughter. And it's just it's a staple of how we live and how we function day to day. So we decided to keep it open. These ceilings are nearly 12 feet high, and I really wanted to highlight that height when you first walk in. So we did that with a few different ways. First was through this 2-tier chandelier that is actually massive in person. I don't know if the scale translates as much on video, but it's beautiful. It's really large in scale, and it just showcases that you have the height to be able to do a 2-tier chandelier. And I also really love the white contrast against the ceiling. We decided to paint the ceiling light blue by Farrow and Ball. It's a really beautiful paint that has a lot of dimension. It changes in color almost depending on the sunlight coming into the room. And when I'm laying down on the couch and I stare up, I feel like I'm looking into the sky, and it's just a very calming, wonderful way to not forget about your ceiling. I always tell people the ceiling is the 5th wall in the room. And yes, while you can of course paint it white and it still can look beautiful depending on the design in the room, I also think, why not paint it something different and bring a little bit of joy to your life? And we also highlighted the scale by adding some wallpaper. I feel like people are a little bit afraid of wallpaper, especially in the living room and especially in a room of this size. There's this interior designer who I follow, Katie Rosenfeld, and she once said that she would wallpaper her face if she could, and nothing has spoken to me more. I would wallpaper every inch in every home for the rest of my life. I love it. I love the texture that it brings, and I specifically chose a wallpaper that wasn't super bold and super busy with a lot of pattern. I did want it to feel almost like a texture from far away as opposed to like a very bold pattern. And I think that this is really, to me, it feels very one tone, and it's just a way to add a little bit more dimension to your walls than just putting like a flat paint. And then another way, we added all of the molding and the wainscoting around the room. And then I found these really beautiful panels on Cherish. They are vintage from, well, antiques actually, from the 1920s. And they were painted by an interior designer named Nina Claiborne out of Texas. She hand painted all of these panels for one of her clients' estate for the ceiling of the home. And I just loved that story, because if I had the ability to paint panels for my client in 100 years from now, they were dispersed and living in other people's homes, and especially another interior designer, I just felt like that was such a special thing. And on top of that, I love how they look. They're really old. They have a lot of patina. I love the warmth that they bring with the wood and, you know, the repetition of the wood and the hutch, and the little pop of Art Deco that they give to the space. And then I had wanted to originally put 2 bookshelves here. My husband and I have a very large collection of like just regular books, novels that have sadly been sitting in storage for many years because we have nowhere to put them. So I was like, finally, we can put 2 bookshelves here. But then I found this really pretty vintage hutch, and then I brought it home and I saw that it had the original plate rails, and I really wanted to honor the piece by using it exactly how it was intended. And luckily for me, I have an addiction to plates, and I love handmade ceramics. To me, this is just art. I don't look at them as, you know, the utilitarian pieces that they are. I think that they're so impressive, like that somebody hand painted all of these, to me is so special. And on top of that, they remind me of little pieces in time. So these are from France, these oyster plates. My husband and I went to Paris for our 9-year anniversary, but also it reminds us because they're oyster plates of our time living in Newport. I understand that having a hutch with plates in a living room could be a little polarizing for people. Yes, they collect dust. Yes, there's a little bit of maintenance to them. And yes, of course, with 2 kids, you have to be sure that this is secured. But if it makes you happy and it's showcasing a collection of something that's personal to you, then I think it's, you know, the best choice for your home. These chairs are from Kenyan, a fine rattan company in the South who I work with all the time. They're family owned. They're such a great team. I don't think that they're in production anymore. I got these about like 6 or so years ago, and I reupholstered them in this beautiful fabric from Rose Tarlow, and then again paired them with the pillows from Jasper. So when I first walked through the condo, the very first thing that I noticed was the natural light. And actually in our living room, the vaulted ceilings, it's almost 12-foot ceilings when you walk in, and it's you feel like it's almost random, like how can a small condo have such, you know, a living room with such grandeur. But that really drew me to the room. Even though it was like a white box that had no character, I saw a lot of potential of what we could do with it. And the kitchen was a really narrow galley kitchen. It was completely dated. There was only, you know, open shelves. There was no cabinetry, closed cabinets. There was dated appliances. It was not fit for a growing family. And it was also only a 2-bedroom when we first moved in. So immediately, you know, the wheels started turning of, let's knock down the wall dividing the kitchen and the dining room. Let's make that one big space and reorient the square footage back into the kitchen and make it more suitable for a growing family. And the original primary bedroom was massive. It was just out of scale. It felt out of place. My husband and I got very used to living in close quarters in New York City apartments, so we certainly didn't need anything of that scale. We had, when we first moved in, like a Peloton in the corner, my desk in the other corner, his desk in the other corner. It felt like a warehouse. So we knew right away, ultimately over time, we were going to divide the room in half and convert the whole thing to a 3-bedroom. So we started off, every year we chipped away at the renovation. We started immediately with the kitchen and the dining room and the entryway, just because it's the first thing that you see and it needed the most amount of work. And not to mention, I had just given birth and we moved in with a 3-week-old newborn, and I had him slung to my chest every day, living through demo and overseeing construction and overseeing a bunch of sub-trades and tile workers and cabinetry workers, and my father-in-law who handled most of the carpentry and the build of our entire home. And I had him slung to my chest. I had a pump in one hand, I had an iPad in the other hand. I'm literally sketching out the cabinetry for the kitchens as we're walking through the space. I'm doing everything in real time. Stakes were high. It was a hot time. I do not recommend this for anyone moving in with a newborn and going right into construction. So it was definitely a chaotic time in our life, but very fruitful, and we love how it turned out, especially the kitchen and the dining nook. So that's all for my living room, and right next to it is actually a small entryway, but what I really want to show you is up in the kitchen. So follow me. This is what I consider to be our little entryway, our drop zone when we come in, and even though it's a small space, I did really want it to have a big impact. It's kind of the first thing that you see when you're walking in. It's the last thing my husband and I see when we're from a long days of work. So I wanted it to set the scene for the rest of the house and what you were gonna expect. And I really wanted you to walk in and be like, oh, a grandma lives here. That's me. I have a really big collection of antique herbariums that you're gonna see scattered throughout the home. But here I wanted to kind of cluster them in this way that was more like a statement and more impactful. I think that they're just so beautiful and they really tell a story. They're so old and fragile, and I just think really beautiful. And I got them custom bobbin framed by Studio Welby in London, and then they painted it in Farrow and Ball's lichen, which I think is just a really beautiful calming green. And then I also wanted the entryway to feel just like whimsical and fun, and just a reminder to not take life too seriously. So these table lamps are actually vintage, hand painted from Portugal. I visited Portugal when I was young with my family, and it's just a beautiful country, and it was a really special trip for us. So I love having that little memento from there. And I paired them with these really fun red squiggle lampshades from Alice Palmer. I love the color red. I use it almost in every single room in the house, sparingly. It's in pops of red, but I just think that it's so cheerful and it completely changes a room. And I also used it repeated it again in the pendant over here, and then in the rug. It's a little bit more of a rust than red, but I love this block print rug from Aaron Gates's rug collection. Again, just kind of reiterating a little bit more traditional and fun and whimsical home that you're about to see. And then moving into my dining area and kitchen. So I actually designed these 3 spaces 4 years ago when we first moved in, and it underwent the largest transformation of the entire home. It was originally a very small, dark, not cute galley kitchen. The wall was about here, so all of this was dedicated dining room space, and just this was the kitchen. The appliances were dated, the tile was dated, everything was just dark and dingy and desperately needed some love. So the very first thing that we did was knock down the wall, dividing the 2 spaces, and just reoriented the square footage into the kitchen. And usually I'm not really a proponent of knocking down walls and giving an open floor space, but this area just really, really called for it. And to me, it didn't make sense having a formal dining room that large when you had a tiny kitchen that you could barely do anything to host people in. So first things first is we did a really classic like perimeter style cabinetry with an island in the center. I really wanted an island to be the workhorse of the room. And I went with a traditional white paint for the cabinets. I feel like white kitchens are getting a bad rap now because everyone's finally starting to embrace color, which I love and I'm a big proponent of. But I think that a white kitchen is timeless, it's classic. As long as you are warming it up with other textures, things like beautiful wood island or like we did with our floors, as long as you're bringing in those colors and other materials in a really thoughtful way, you're never gonna regret going white with your kitchens. So the color here is actually called Creamy by Sherwin-Williams, which is another thing, like go with a really nice warm off-white paint. Don't do anything that's like super white out white, and you will instantly feel how warm it can be in this kitchen. And for me personally, I knew that I wanted the focal point to be the floors. I went absolutely insane looking for these floors. I was sourcing for like months. I had a very particular green in mind. I had a very particular size in mind. I wanted them to be 12 by 12 inches. I didn't want them smaller or bigger. And I really wanted them to be marble or some sort of like, you know, living finish of material. I didn't want to do porcelain or ceramic. So a lot of nitpicking things on my part, but these just did not exist anywhere. I couldn't find them anywhere, and I found finally some green tile, but it was like in Italy, and I wasn't gonna ship them over here, especially during COVID. It just was not great. So after months of scouring online, local tile shops everywhere, I found these. This is a moss green marble tile and a cream limestone as two long 12 by 24 inch rectangle pieces. They were just like up against the wall in the corner of a tile store. And I almost laughed because I'm like, I can't believe I just found this, you know, randomly in the store after everything that I've been to and through, and they're together like this and they're perfect. So I took the two pieces and I brought them home and I asked my tile guy if he could cut every single one of them in half perfectly to make me the checkerboard floor of my dreams. And he did a wonderful job. And I think that they're truly like the most beautiful part of the kitchen, and anyone who walks in here is certainly drawn to them because of especially the color of the green. And another way that we, you know, brought that in was through the island. I also went a little crazy trying to find an antique farmhouse table to kind of ground the space. Everything was feeling really new, really like, you know, hard materials, stones, whites. Everything was just a little too new for me, and I wanted an antique table to just ground the space, give it some personality. But I found nothing in the scale and the dimensions that I needed. So I ended up drawing this up and giving it to my father-in-law, who then built it for us. And it is the absolute workhorse of our kitchen. We use it for prepping for dinner, for hosting. We use it for, you know, laying out hors d'oeuvres just like this. And we love it so much. My son plays underneath this island all the time, and it's just a really, you know, heart of the kitchen for us. And then the coffee bar. This is my baby. I did this specifically for my espresso machine. I am that person with an espresso machine that only talks about their espresso machine. I'm sorry, but I got this as a gift for my wedding. And my parents are from Colombia. My dad literally grew up on a coffee farm that's still in our family in use today. I have coffee like coursing through my veins. I cannot exist without it. So I remember, again, this was 4 years ago, but I was just like, I started by sketching out the espresso machine and then just building out the rest of the cabinetry around it. I knew I wanted it in the center. I knew I wanted some open shelves for my recipe books. And then I have a very large collection of dishware. I love plates and china. I love anything handmade or vintage. So I needed the storage to fit some of those plates. Like for instance, like to me, this is just so cool. It's so pretty. Like someone did this. How? I can't do it. It's so, so beautiful. And a lot of what I'm attracted to are these clay sort of bowls and anything that's hand painted, and it looks like it's not perfect and it just looks so old and beautiful. And even this big plate right here, whoever painted it, Luis and Paquita, I have your dish and it's beautiful. Thank you. So it's just little things like that that make me so happy, and I knew that I needed to have the space to put them in. This was the perfect position for that. And then moving into our dining nook. So again, we don't have a formal dining room. This is our only dining area. And there's only 4 of us, so on a day-to-day basis, that's totally fine. But we also host a lot. So I knew that I needed to maximize seating as much as possible. And I decided that the best way to do that was with this built-in banquette. We have hosted like 15 people sitting on this bench before, and it's just a super cozy, really great place to gather. And I know that people, feel one way or another about banquettes, usually because if you're stuck in the middle, it's a hard time getting out. But luckily, I found this beautiful antique English farmhouse table. This is from a favorite dealer of mine, the Parsons Nose Antiques. And it is really old, so I love it so much, but most importantly, it's lightweight. We can easily move this thing in and out, and we do all the time. So from a functionality standpoint, we're not afraid of disadvantage with the banquette. And I also really envisioned this being just like the heart of our home. I wanted it to be cozy. I wanted it to be comfortable. This holds everything from, late nights working and designing to very, very early mornings bottle feeding. We've taken naps here. We do arts and crafts here. And we host dinner as a family together every single night here. So it's really the heart of our home, and it's just a special little cozy nook for us. And just really quickly with my basket rail. So I love collecting baskets. I find them in antique stores in my travels, just like in random little places. And when we first moved in, I kept telling my husband I want to figure out a way to display my baskets. And originally I thought maybe some floating shelves, but I felt like that felt too crouched. And then I love Bunny Mellon and the way that she displays her baskets. And I saw one picture of, she had like a coat rack with the baskets looking like as if they were climbing up the wall and then going across a pole. And I thought, that's how I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna get a drapery rod and I'll just hang them over these windows. My husband did not get it. He was not seeing the vision. He was just like, I don't understand. Why are we hanging baskets? Why? And not for nothing, but this man has supported every single idea and gives me carte blanche with this entire house and has let me wallpaper everything I want. And the amount of things that I've made him do for me, and he always does, I was hilariously surprised that this is where I lost him. I was like, it's just baskets. So he kept calling it the basket bluff of 2022, telling me that I wasn't going to do it. And then he comes home one day and they're up. And he was like, oh, okay, I get it. They're charming. They're nice. And we photographed the space. And it is the first picture that got published almost immediately in a nationwide publication. And it's the only picture that I get reposted until this day, 4 years later, constantly. So now he likes to joke that the baskets are what pays the bills around here. Some tips I would share for someone who's about to embark on a big renovation project. As someone who has been through big renovation projects every single year for the past 4 years in their home, living through construction, bringing home 2 babies to demolished construction zones, I have no tips for you. It is high stakes. It is very stressful. If you can avoid living through construction, it's amazing, but obviously most people can't because of just resources. And that was our situation. We did, thoughtfully, as much as we could, try to plan everything out. And it's very easy when you have a good team behind you. I do recommend, working with an interior designer, working with an architect, working with a good contractor who has a really great team, who listens to your needs, who understands your vision. Having that all in place beforehand, and more importantly, having as much planned out as possible before you start knocking down walls and making those changes to those plans. If you know you're going to renovate a bathroom, try to pick out that tile, the paint colors, any wallpapers, a lot of the finishes that you're going to put into that room so that you can get those things in advance. Because if you go in and you just start knocking down walls without having plans, that's how timelines get delayed. Because let's say then you want a beautiful tile that maybe it's a custom tile and it takes a long time to get here, and now you're delaying the project further and further. So I think organization more than anything is key. Having a good team behind you is key. And if you're doing it in phases like I did, choose the places that need the most work right away. We chose the kitchen because it was not ideal not having a working kitchen for the first 5 months of my son's life. Let's go up to my kids' rooms. So the first room I'm going to show you is my son's room. This is actually my favorite room in the whole house, which is hard because I love every room in the house, but this one really like speaks to my soul. It is quintessentially boy, quintessentially just my son in every which way. It showcases all of his interests, the phases that he's gone through, the sports that he's obsessed with. He's obsessed with hockey and baseball and golf and all these little collections of toys and dinosaurs and things that really just showcase him in every way. And it was really special to me because the way that we moved into this house so fast and furiously and only focused on the kitchen, I wasn't able to give my son a nursery that I really would have designed had I had more time and resources at the time to do that. So obviously there's a lot worse things, but as an interior designer, not being able to design your first baby's nursery was like gut-wrenching to me. So I really went all out for his big boy room. He's 3.5 now, and his personality is just like fully on display. And I wanted him to feel like he was part of the process and that this was actually a space that he could call his and that he felt comfortable and that, was truly his. And I first gained inspiration for the room. I was actually watching Winnie the Pooh, like the feature film with my son. And before they dive into the cartoon portion of the movie, they actually start off by entering into Christopher Robin's like live, like real life room. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful room. It feels so like vintage with all of the plaid and textiles. And then it just genuinely feels like a little boy lives there. It feels like a fairy tale with all his like toy soldiers and his stuffed animals and his little collectibles. And I wanted to like make that same feeling happen for my son's room. And I've actually taken my son antiquing with me since he was born, because as a first-time mom, I had no idea what to do with a newborn besides like staring at each other all day. So I just continued living my life and taking him to places with me, and a lot of that was antiquing. So I've been kind of training his eye since birth to pick things that make him happy, that he really likes, that are a little bit fun, a little different, a little whimsical. And he's done a lot of that here himself. He picked out this little weird funky fish. He picked out this sailboat. Same with these little tiny guys. The vintage baseballs he got for free. Hot tip: if you're going to go antiquing, bring your child. You might get free stuff. Like all of these things, he actually found this little box, this little woodlands box he found at an antique shop, and he keeps his, if I can open it, oh my gosh, his baseball cards and his hockey cards in here, which I think is so cute. And it's just so personal to him. Same with this little ship. I found this really sweet lamp on eBay. There's so much vintage in this room that we've both collected for it over time. Same with this really sweet whale on the wall and the compass. Like all these things that I'm like, I can't believe you're choosing things that, first of all, that I like too, but also that like actually makes sense in the space and just looks really sweet. So I love that I've been able to do that with him. And then just from a design standpoint, this room and my daughter's room right next door, so this whole space used to be the primary bedroom when we first moved in. It was massive. It's both rooms put together. So I knew right away when we moved in that we were just going to split it in half and create, a 3-bedroom. So in order to do that, we really had to add a lot of architectural elements to the space. We added the crown molding, the beadboard wainscoting, which I painted this really pretty, almost grayish blue, so it doesn't feel like too much like a little kid. It's a little bit more elevated. And we also painted the doors, I think, in a really fun way. I got this, a lot of my inspiration is from British design. I love London. I love visiting just the UK in general, and I get a lot of my inspiration from them. And I feel like this is something that we don't do here enough. We don't treat the ceilings or the doors with enough like love and creativity that they do. So I thought this was a really special way just to add a fun touch with the paint. And then this plaid wallpaper is like very vintage feel, like it's a super cream. It has a little bit of texture to it too. And I just felt like that was very just quintessential boys' room, and I love how cozy it instantly makes the space. And then again, vintage touches to me, especially in bedrooms, are like everything, and this is where, again, a vintage Sputnik light, vintage wood Swedish sconces that I found off of Etsy. I got this mirror custom made. I really wanted a pop of green in here that you're also seeing with his little train name that my sister got him when he was first born. And the bed was actually custom made. I love these pine sleigh beds. They're just so classic and timeless to me. And I just think that they make the whole room. It instantly gives it that fairy tale vibe that I was trying to get off of the Winnie the Pooh movie. And then we just filled it with, again, and also this tortoiseshell bamboo vintage table that was actually a magazine rack table that we put a bunch of books. Obviously, my son's not reading, like the Odyssey over here, but he's obsessed with this collection of books that my husband and I found at a bookstore in New York City. I think he just loves the colors of them, frankly, so he loves taking them out and then pretending that he's reading them to us because he thinks that he's being, an adult, and instead of us reading to him at bedtime. I think that that's so sweet. And again, just like tying it back to our love of British design in London, this piece over here is actually the opening scene to 101 Dalmatians. This was my favorite movie as a child. I was obsessed with it for many, many different reasons, but more importantly was the animation style. I loved the way that they illustrated that movie, and it's so sad to me that it's a lost art now and that we've really, modernized animation that way. But I just love the way that it is so much, and also the city of London is such a special place for us and how many times we've been there. My husband actually got this painted for me as a gift, and when I saw it, I instantly knew right away that it should go in our son's room. And I then just framed it, and again, a beautiful pop of red, repeating in the light fixture, and again in some of the art. And I just think it's a really, really fun collected room. Like, my son went through a really big phase of being obsessed with Stuart Little, and I found this race car toy of Stuart Little on eBay from literally like the 90s, and it doesn't work, but it's so cool, and he loves it. And same with these. He picked these out at an antique store. He's obsessed with dinosaurs. He's obsessed with Scooby-Doo, but it needs to be like the original 60s version. I feel like my son is like, this is definitely not his first time on Earth. He's an old soul. So yeah, this is just, it's a super, super special room that I genuinely feel like I'm walking into a fairy tale every time I'm in here. I would describe my style as lived in, layered, and just cozy. I'm really attracted to homes where you walk in and you actually know who's living there. You can sense the personality. You see collections of things. You see things that mean something to them. You see really interesting art on the walls. It's not just, bare. It's not like you're walking into a museum. There's personality. People actually live here. That's when I feel that, the design is great and you've done a really good job, but what speaks for itself is really the personal mementos and pieces that you've collected over time. And I've been really fortunate I've done a lot of traveling my entire life. I've visited nearly 30 countries. I've visited many states in the US, and I am very much attracted to like old architecture. I love visiting London and France and seeing, very, very, very old buildings, and in Italy that have lasted for thousands of years. And I've stayed everywhere. I've stayed in like questionable hostels to like luxurious hotels and everything in between. And I've taken pieces from all of those places, and I tried to infuse that in my design so that it feels very collected and well-traveled and global as much as possible. I'm not saying that that's, possible for everybody, but because I've had that opportunity to travel as much, I think it's really important to bring that into design as well. So this is my daughter's nursery. Like I said, I wasn't able to design my son's nursery when he was first born, so I was so excited to design this room, especially because it was for a little girl and I really got to go all out with flowers and all things girly. And originally, this actually was my husband's office when we first did the conversion to 3 rooms. And we color drenched the walls with Fairwind Ball's Pigeon, which here translates to a really beautiful green. And we had made it super moody, dark. I had my husband's really beautiful desk and his bookshelves, and it was perfect for him, and he was so happy. And then 3 days later, I found out I was pregnant. And a month later, I found out it was a girl. So I was like, count your days, because in about 7 months, I'm going to be putting some floral wallpaper in this room. And we did. And I found this maroon floral wallpaper that when I brought the sample in, originally I told him we're going to have to repaint the room as well. Obviously, everything has to change. But when I brought the sample in, I actually loved how the green looked against the wallpaper. The wallpaper instantly brightened up the room. It didn't feel dark anymore. It felt like a really beautiful, peaceful green, and I loved how it looked on the ceiling as well. So we made just a conscious decision of keeping that color. And then I also knew that I did not want like a pastel nursery. I really wanted bolder colors. I wanted to use maroons and reds and greens. And I was antique shopping and I found this Swedish rug. And I was like, that's it. That's the colorway that I want for the room. That is, it has reds, it has greens, it has maroons, it has blues, it has everything that I want to just kind of splash across this room. So I knew that I wanted to have this as the accent rug in the room. And I think it also gives the space just a feeling a little bit more of elevated, as opposed to, you know, more leaning like a baby nursery. And those same colors I then pulled for this maroon throw pillow that I upholstered in Jasper fabric. This is a really sweet vintage quilt that I found that, again, are repeating all, the maroons and hot pinks. And then all of those colors are then found in this painting by Danielle Cosan. It's her take on Bemelman's Bar from the Carlisle in New York City. And I just love her take on this. It looks a little bit more modern, a little bit more just like different from how it's interpreted, and it's been interpreted so many times through wallpaper and various forms of art. And it just reminds me of our time living in New York City. So that makes me so happy too. But I just felt like it's a perfect addition to my daughter's nursery. And then I really wanted a canopy over the crib. I wanted something simple. I didn't want a very traditional, I wanted nothing with like a crown or anything. I really just wanted this. I wanted beautiful fabric draped over the crib. So I found this from Lisa Fine Textiles. It's like perfect again for the color scheme of the room, and also just really quintessential for a girl's nursery. And I wanted it to be reversible, so I found this really beautiful butter yellow solid fabric from Schumacher. So I had that done on the other side. And I just think it makes such a statement over the crib, and it's also very traditional. I think we're starting to see canopies come back now, which I love. And I mean, I had one as a baby over my crib, and I just think that it's such a nice touch. And then I found these little vintage heart pieces that I love so much. And I paired these rattan sconces from Pookie lights on either side, not just for the functionality, they're just so sweet as well. And then the dresser was actually a vintage find that, again, adding in some butter yellow, taking that from the Schumacher yellow in the canopy, and I love the pops of blue. You'll also see the yellow here in the table lamp. And then I found these really, really pretty Italian plates off of First Dibs, and I just love the paper mache dress look, and I thought that they were perfect for her room. And I mean, I love plates. As we know, I will find a wall to put plates on, even in the most unexpected places. So I thought that was a really great, sweet way to display them. And then over here, this was a sweet little gift from my best friend before my daughter was born. And then we have just like a bookshelf here with books that are more nostalgic for me. This is a vintage collection of Junie B. Jones books and Eloise and Winnie the Pooh. and you know, just books, even like the Babysitter's Club, like anything that reminds me of my childhood is what I wanted to incorporate into her room until she gets older and her own personality starts shining through, and I start learning what makes her happy, and I start bringing those pieces in. And I feel like people have a hard time sometimes with nurseries because they think because it's a baby, they need to follow some sort of a theme. And I get that thinking. But I feel like if you just start from a place of your own childhood and your own nostalgia, and you bring in those pieces that make you happy, and then you layer in vintage items like the dresser, and this ottoman was also vintage, the rug, like a lot of these pieces makes the room feel like it's actually part of your home, and it's not just like, you know, a baby's room that's separate from the rest of the decor and the design of the rest of your house. And then my favorite find of all time is actually this light fixture. This is a Grimm's fairy tale vintage light that I found off of Cherish. I love it so much. I actually found this like 6 years ago, and I have been carting it around from house to house ever since, much to the dismay of my husband, with a lot of the things that I buy at antique stores and try to use in different projects. And I was waiting for the perfect project to use this in, and it just didn't, you know, become a reality. So as soon as I found out that I was having a girl, I ran to the garage and I knew exactly where it was, and I made my husband put it up. And my daughter is obsessed with this thing. She's always looking at it, and I love it. I think it's so funky and it's so fun. And once again, you know, vintage lighting, this is where you're gonna find those quirky, really unique pieces that I just don't think that people make anymore. They're not as produced as they used to be. So I think that's a really beautiful touch. Also, we live right next to a really beautiful park and a duck pond. And we go there in the summer every single day. And my son is obsessed with it, and so is my daughter. And they're obsessed with watching the ducks. So I found these little sweet ducks with these rain boots, and I thought that they were so cute and such a nice addition. So even little items like that, just to remind you, again, you know, she's a baby. She doesn't have many likes and interests yet, but I know that she's obsessed with watching the ducks. So little items like that you can tie back into your just everyday life is how you can form a really personal space. I went to school for journalism, communication, and business, and I interned for MTV. And they ended up having an opening and hired me right after graduation, and I spent almost 8 years of my life in the halls of Viacom working across MTV and VH1. I learned how to work in that corporate setting, and I took a lot of those skills with me now when starting my own business. But I kept feeling a pull toward interior design, which at the time was surprising because I had no idea that you could be an interior designer. I did not know anything about the industry, and you know, my parents are immigrants from Colombia. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment for most of my childhood. I had green leather couches and like green wall-to-wall carpeting and like a 4x6 space that I called my own within that apartment. We certainly did not have, you know, I didn't have a mom who was a designer or a grandmother, or our place wasn't professionally designed. I had nothing to do with this world until my 20s, and I started traveling, and also a product of living in New York and being so exposed to architecture and design constantly. And as a child, I loved drawing. I was convinced that I was going to be an illustrator, an animator, that I was going to make the next like big Disney movie or Nickelodeon movie. I actually interned at Nickelodeon too, so I was convinced that that was my path. But so art and design has played a big role in my life forever. And then in my 20s, when I got more exposed to interior design, I started really designing my apartments with my husband at the time, boyfriend, and started taking care of how I was actually designing everything. And then I started helping friends and family, and I became kind of obsessed, and I would like go home and just like read shelter magazines all day and go on Pinterest all day and look at photos on Instagram all day long. I was very, very pulled and attracted to it for years, even while working at MTV. And during COVID, actually, which I feel like is a big inflection point for a lot of other designers who decided to switch gears to this career. During COVID, I had the chance to design my father-in-law's basement in his mountain home. And it was a pretty big first project, especially for my very first like real renovation project. We had to renovate the bathroom, we put in a wet bar, we had like the family room area with built-ins, and then we had the lounge area with a pool table, and we added like wainscoting and a bunch of really beautiful architecture and new flooring. Like it was a substantial project, even though it was just one space technically with the basement. And he did everything himself. Like I mentioned, he's a carpenter, but he did everything to my vision and to my spec and to the drawings that I gave him. And then I, put all the finishing touches and the furniture and the decoration part of it all. And then I just posted those photos one day to my personal Instagram, not really thinking anything of it, more just like, hey, I love doing this on the side, and this is the product of, my very first renovation project. And that took off in a way that I was absolutely not expecting. I started getting DMs from family and friends, people I hadn't spoken to in a long time, just asking my advice for their homes. And then I started taking on more and more side projects. I still had a full-time job during this time. And then I started feeling like I could actually do this. I took some online courses. I read as much as possible. I watched a lot of videos like on Masterclass, and I tried to educate myself as much as possible in that world. Another impetus for that actually was we found out that my mom had cancer. She's okay now, but at the time, it really drove my decision to focus on something that I actually loved and that I was passionate about, and I felt like I was wasting my time not putting all of my effort into this endeavor. So I did that. I started my eponymous firm, and it's been 6 years since there, and it's insane how fast time has flown. I've worked on projects now all over the country, and a lot of projects here locally that I'm super proud of, and we are continuing to grow every single year, building out my team. And when we moved from Newport back to New York, I essentially had to relaunch my firm, which was difficult because I had just given birth. So it was a lot to manage in terms of I didn't really give myself a maternity leave. I jumped right into the project here in my own house and started taking projects elsewhere. It was definitely a very chaotic time, but I learned a lot, and I've gotten some really, really wonderful clients out of that I've been working with for years now. We had our very first new build project that was a big milestone for the firm, and we also have a few things in the works and collaborations upcoming that I can't wait for everyone to see. So this is our primary bedroom. And my sweet husband, after giving me carte blanche in the whole house and letting me wallpaper every inch of it, including the kitchen, so gently said, please, for the love of God, do not wallpaper our bedroom. And I said, okay, you don't have to be so violent. What would you like instead? And I kind of treated him like the client in many ways. And I said, tell me what your vision is. Tell me how you want to feel. And he has a really high pressure job. He's also getting his MBA from Wharton. And then he comes home and he's an incredibly active father, and he does bath time and bedtime and dinner and all of the things. And he said, I just want to come home and at the end of the night be able to relax and feel like I'm in a very calm, serene, just like Zen bedroom and just like feel calm. So I really took that in stride. And I also, we've done a lot of traveling together, and I kind of wanted it to feel like some of the boutique hotels that we've stayed in. So I took that theme and kind of ran with it. And first we painted the walls in this really beautiful slipper satin by Farrow and Ball, which I feel like has gotten very popular lately, and I love it. It's a really dimensional, beautiful color, very calming. And to kind of satisfy the itch that I had to still wallpaper this room, we put drapery on the back wall from wall to wall. We actually have 2 windows behind our bed that are off-center to the wall, which drove me insane. And then on top of that, we couldn't center the bed on the wall either because we needed to make space for a desk. As you saw, there's no office in here or nook that we could have carved out space for a desk other than here. So I basically just needed this wall to kind of disappear. And I thought that the best way to do that was doing wall-to-wall drapery. And it also kind of gave that same enveloping effect that a wallpaper would have had we gone that route. And I think it creates a lot of texture, a lot of movement from the pleats and the drapery, and just a really beautiful solve for that issue. And then I also, I think even more than doubled the width of each panel of drapery in here because I wanted, again, going with that theme of like a boutique hotel feel. When you're at these hotels, they have very luxurious drapery, very heavy, stacked, like you're waking up in the morning and you're like wisping the drapery open and letting the sunshine in, and I wanted it to feel like that in our room as well. So I thought having this, substantial drapery could help reach that. We went really simple with the bedding. After, working all day long and coming home and chasing around 2 kids, I need to be able to just jump into bed, and my husband feels the same. So we went with this beautiful hand-stitched coverlet that, even though it's white and, at first glance, it's a little bit, subdued. When you come in close here and see the wonderful handmade nature of it and how beautiful it is, it definitely elevates the bedding right away. This is from a company called Roseland in Maine. And then I did just a jumbo oversized lumbar pillow as like the statement on the bed. This is in Jasper's Tree of Life fabric, which I love. Even just the name, Tree of Life, it felt very zen and perfect for the theme in the room. And then I found this really beautiful Suzani. I love Suzani's. I found this at a favorite antique store in Connecticut called Antique and Artisan. And I just loved the colorways here. I love the maroon and the blues, and I felt like it was a really great way to tie the bedroom back into the rest of the house and the colors that you see and the patterns that you see everywhere else, so that it still feels very much part of our home. And then I also thought adding a ticking stripe skirt was just a really beautiful way to ground the bedding as well. And then over here, I found this bamboo mirror also at Antique and Artisan. I thought the scale and just the warmth of it was really perfect for this space. And then we just have laid out a few special books and things that have meaning for us, like our time living in New York City, our time living in Newport, wedding memorabilia. This is actually coasters from our wedding venue. My husband and I spent many anniversaries at our venue while we lived in New York City. It's in the Catskills in New York. And then we ended up getting engaged there and we ended up getting married there. So it's a super special place for us. And every time I went, I would steal their coasters and I would write on the backside the date of when we went, so that I could remember that forever. And we also both really love Hitchcock movies. This is a little shot that I found so funny. It's from Birds, which is our favorite Hitchcock film. This is Tippi Hedren, the main actress from the movie. And I just thought it was a really fun way to just take note of our love for Hitchcock movies. And over here, we have a bay window that was a really nice surprise just architecturally in the condo because, like I said, it was just a plain white box prior to us coming in. So this was a nice surprise, and it's a really sweet little nook and corner in the room. We kept it pretty simple. I did this custom pillow, again, in Jasper fabric, which clearly I'm obsessed with. And I tied in some really cute bamboo roller blinds to just bring in some texture. And then lastly, again, I found this vintage gilt toll light from Italy that reminds us of our first trip ever together internationally, which was to Italy. I think it's really elegant, like the gold flakiness just elevates the room and I think is really perfect for a primary bedroom. So now going into our primary bath. This space is the only space actually that doesn't get any natural light in the whole home. And when we first moved in, it was really dark, very dated. There was like Formica countertops and polished nickel fixtures, and the subway tile was actually original when we first came in. And I just took a step back, and it kind of reminded me of one of the bathrooms in New York City in one of our apartments during our time living there. So I kind of leaned into that, and I felt like, how could I make this feel a little bit Art Deco, a little bit New York, old school New York subway tile bathrooms. So I decided to keep the subway tile because I didn't see the need in ripping it out. And I just elevated all of the pieces and the fixtures within the room. So we brought in this double vanity. I replaced all of the hardware and the fixtures, these really beautiful unpolished nickel sconces with these pleated lampshades. I painted everything a really warm, beautiful white. I wanted it to, again, still feel like it was part of our bedroom. I wanted that serene feeling. And then we did this picture frame molding throughout the whole room that very much felt like in line with that theme. And then I found this vintage alabaster light fixture on Cherish. And after all was said and done, I kind of took a step back, and everything looked really beautiful, very elegant, but it also felt very white and a little too cold. So I was trying to figure out ways to bring in more warmth, and I didn't want to do a lot of colors in here. And that's not my MO, as you've now seen through my house. I love colors and patterns. So restraint is a little bit difficult for me when it comes to that, but I decided to keep everything. I really was envisioning everything in brown and white. So I thought, how could I bring in brown tones, bamboo, maybe some rattan, some wood, to really warm everything up? And we did that in a few ways. One is this wooden toilet seat, which again feels very like vintage New York. It also feels very British. And then I found these oversized, really wonderful bamboo mirrors, chinoiserie style, that just from even like a scale perspective were so perfect. They fit the molding, the picture frame molding so perfectly. And I think that they instantly changed the space and gave it that warmth that it needed. And then I found I really wanted a vintage, like worn and torn rug. And I found this Turkish rug runner that was perfect for that. It looks very old. I love the brown stripe. I feel like it's leading you directly into the shower opening. And of course, I somehow managed to still get a little bit of red in here with the red stripe on the rug. And then I kept looking at the space over the shower, and it was quite a bit of, the header was really large, and I kept thinking, what can I do there to liven it up? Can I add some plates, which I did over here? Or what can I do to make it a little bit different? And I just thought like I could totally fit a cornice and some custom drapery in this bathroom, which is not the first thing that you would think of doing, but I felt like it just needed something to elevate it and make it feel a little bit more unique. And I found this fabric from Sewn, which is in that same brown and white color scheme. It's a very like creamy white, so it feels super warm. And I also think that the climbing vines gives an effect of like almost like you're in Greece or just like in the Mediterranean, and again kind of transports you somewhere else. And I felt like that was the vibe that I was going for within the primary bedroom and bathroom. So I designed this, and I had my upholsterer bring it to life, and he came in and set it up, and I was like stalking him and standing right behind him because I was so giddy and excited. And it worked out really well, and I think it's definitely the statement in the room. What I think makes a house a home is where my family is. Wherever my husband and my 2 kids and my dog are, like that is home to me. And when I walk in here and I go into, we're doing bedtime with the kids, and we're in my son's room or we're in my daughter's nursery, and I look around and I see all the little things that we've collected over time that show their personalities, and every single nook and cranny and corner of this home has been a memory or a moment in time that has been so special for us. So I think home is really just where you feel you're most yourself and you're most comfortable and you're most safe.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.